I want you to see what the grading is like on an AP exam relative to questions. Yeah. So the first problem that you did, so on the AP exam, you end up with anywhere between a 1 and 5. You have half multiple choice, half free response, but each one of your free response gets a number, and each one of the parts of your free response gets an E, a P, or an I, and that is it. An E means essentially correct, a P means partially correct, and an I means incorrect. Those are the only 3 options. So I want you to see the format of this relative to a problem that you just did. So this one is the different meals we've got elementary, high school, and middle school students, and focused on good nutrition. Well, are elementary school, middle school, and high school students going to be the same or different with their opinions on meals? Probably going to be pretty different. So part A is describing a simple random sampling procedure that the administrators could use to select 200 students from the 2,500 students in the district. So they use no consideration as to anything about the individuals. That is just a simple random sample. So part A, this is an example answer. The administrators could number an alphabetical list of students from 1 to 2,500. They could then use a random number generator from a calculator. I'll tell you about that eventually, which is kind of like what I did at the beginning. To generate 200 unique random numbers from 1 to 2,500. Students corresponding to these 200 numbers would be asked to participate in the survey. So let's look at what their scoring does. It says essentially correct if the response describes a sampling procedure for generating a simple random sample and the description of the sampling procedure includes sufficient details for implementation. So like someone could actually go do it. This one is not that specific of why it's an EP and I. Partially is if they used correctly, but they didn't explain it well. Incorrect if the random selection is not used in the correct way for a simple random sample, which for your quiz would be most of you with incorrect on this one. Part B, if stratified random sampling procedure is used, give one example of an effective variable on which to stratify this survey. So why do we stratify? Because we think that the reason we stratify might do what? We think they might respond differently. So we want to make sure we include some of the different responses. So here, what they're looking for is a little bit more obvious. It is essentially correct if the response identifies a reasonable stratification variable, generic, and provides a reasonable justification in context, stating like the groups might differ with respect to food preferences or nutritional awarenesses. So if you never said their opinions on food preferences would be different between the groups I selected, you would get a P here. Does that make sense? And so I'm trying to kind of slowly introduce you to the way the AP grades. So even if you had a really good answer, this problem says nothing about make sure you mention this or anything like that. You have to know that you are connecting the reason you group to what you are recording, and they need to all be similar to that response within each other, but different from group to group. So if you just said something like stratify by grade level because they're different, then you would get a P here. Does that make sense? Describe one statistical advantage of using stratified over simple random sample. Their example answer is one statistical advantage of using a stratified random sample as opposed to simple random sample is if the elementary, middle, and high school strata create groups that differ with respect to what they value, so what we're measuring, then for the same overall sample size, a more accurate estimate. So we want to make sure all of them are in there on purpose. Let me see what their breakdown is here. So it only says essentially correct if it provides a reasonable statistical advantage of stratified random sampling that is not also true of random sampling? Again, most of your answers on the quiz said because every single individual would have an equally likely chance of being selected. But that's just a definition of random that has nothing to do with specific to stratified random sampling. So provides a reasonable statistical advantage that is either not well communicated or is not in context would be partially correct. Saying things like the data would be more accurate, I got a lot of answers like that. That would be, you would get no credit for anything on that problem. If you said stratified random sampling is better, you would get no credit for that problem. So kind of starting to see the breakdown of how things are graded here. With the other one, for convenience, an apartment building owner wants to use cluster sampling, in which the floors are clusters to select 8 apartments. Describe a process for randomly selecting 8 different apartments using this method. So here, your floors would be your clusters, and you would have to specify randomly selecting 1 through 9, and then continue to specify that once that floor was selected, every single room on that floor was selected. So essentially correct here is a 2-part thing. Essentially correct if the indication that 2 floors are randomly selected with all 4 apartments on each of the floors selected forming the sample. So that's just saying we randomly selected 2 out of the 9, and then all of them from that floor were selected. And then the description of a valid random sampling procedure for selecting the 2 floors that could be implemented so that somebody else could actually do it themselves. So if you just said you would select 2 floors and then select all of the rooms on that floor, you would be partially correct on this because you didn't tell them how to do it. It says describe a process, not explain who you are selecting. And then B, an alternative sampling method would be a stratified random sample of 8 apartments where the strata are apartments with children and without children, and that's where the stars are from. A stratified random sample of size 8 might include 2 randomly selected apartments with children and 6 with no. In the context of the situation, give 1 statistical advantage of selecting such a stratified sample as opposed to a cluster sample. This is essentially the same thing it asked on the other one. What is the statistical advantage of stratified over cluster? What does it do? That I just said in the other answer. Ensures the groups that we think are going to have differing opinions are going to be included in our sample. Yet again, another one on the quiz that y'all were not writing all the way out right. Questions on these?